Monsters, murder, mayhem. The world of gothic horror and pulp fiction comes to life every week on Wednesday's Weird Stories. And welcome back to Wednesday's Weird Stories. This is your weekly source for all of those wonderful things, spooky and funky and weird and all of that good stuff. For those of you tuning in for the first time, we do a weekly retelling of a classic gothic horror or pulp fiction, folktale kind of thing, dipping back into those public domain era stories where, the spiritualism movement was going. There's a lot of talk about ghosts, and people were really into just getting spooked and scared for a little bit. And, there's really nothing wrong with that. That still is a popular thing to this day. We've got all sorts of spooky things going on with horror movies and things like that. And getting a minutely late start today because I was actually watching a horror movie with my wife. A phenomenal Spanish flick called Veronica. That was one that she found on Netflix. So if you're into the spooky movies, and if you're listening, you probably are into spooky movies. Check that out. It's on Netflix, called Veronica. It's supposedly based off of a true story of something that happened in Spain. It's kind of their equivalent of our Exorcist stories and things like that. So I was impressed. I liked it. Good story. More things that you don't want to mess with if you don't know quite what you're doing. Now tonight's story, we are dipping into a new author for us. We're going to be going through a story by Robert W. Chambers. And Mr. Chambers was a prolific writer throughout the late 1800s and first really third of the 1900s, right up until about 1937. He was cranking out anywhere from 1 to 4 books a year. Sometimes short stories. He did some novels. He did some children's stories, all sorts of stuff, really kind of expanding throughout the genres and not just in this weird tales, horror, supernatural kind of stuff, but really writing love stories, writing full novels, children's books, all sorts of stuff. But he really seemed to gain his most notoriety and literary critique and claim for his weird tales and some of the supernatural stuff. And one of the collections of short stories that really set him off in the literary realm and got him a lot of praise from his fellow authors. Even H.P. Lovecraft was a big fan of Chambers, was his collection of short tales called The King in Yellow. And that's where the story is going to be coming from tonight, is one of those short stories. This is a little bit less, but it's definitely not, it's not a spooky story tonight, but it falls into that weird realm and kind of looking at the energetic ties that we make with each other and, how certain things play out that if you just look at it on the surface, it could just be a normal, everyday occurrence. But when you look a little bit deeper into things, then things get a little spookier and potentially a little bit creepier too. So our tale tonight is The Street of the Four Winds. And it's really a tale about kind of that haunting feeling of lost love and, what do you do when you're kind of obsessed with someone, but you think it all just went wrong, but you can't get the memory of them out of your head, and do those energetic connections really hold tight throughout the ages and throughout the years. So that's what Chambers was exploring in this, and it's got a cat too as a central theme. So it was again driving right into my heart with that one. So the guy's rescuing a cat that had gotten out and was wandering around. So hey, that's kind of what I do, right? Right. That's why we got Grace here in the studio. Wandering cats needing to be saved, right? All right. Well, without any further ado, then, let's go ahead and get into tonight's story. This is The Street of the Four Winds by Robert W. Chambers. The animal paused on the threshold, interrogative alert, ready for flight if necessary. Severn laid down his pallet and held his hand out in welcome. The cat remained motionless, her yellow eyes fastened upon Severn. "Puss," he said in a low, pleasant voice, "come in." The tip of her tail twitched uncertainly. "Come in," he said again. Apparently she found his voice reassuring, for she slowly settled upon all fours, her eyes still fastened upon him, her tail tucked under her gaunt flanks. He rose from his easel smiling. She eyed him quietly, and when he walked toward her, she watched him bend above her without a wince. Her eyes followed his hand until it touched her head. Then she uttered a ragged mew. It had long been Severn's custom to converse with animals, probably because he lived so much alone. And now he said, "What's the matter, Puss?" Her timid eyes sought his. "I understand," he said gently. "You shall have it at once." Then moving quietly about, he busied himself with the duties of a host, rinsed a saucer, filled it with the rest of the milk from the bottle on the window-sill, and kneeling down, crumbled a roll into the hollow of his hand. The creature rose and crept toward the saucer. With the handle of a palette knife, he stirred the crumbs and milk together, and stepped back as she thrust her nose into the mess. He watched her in silence. From time to time, the saucer clinked upon the tiled floor as she reached for a morsel on the rim. And at last the bread was all gone, and her purple tongue traveled over every unlicked spot until the saucer shone like polished marble. Then she sat up and coolly turned her back to him, began her ablutions. "Keep it up," said Severn, much interested. "You need it." She flattened one ear, but neither turned nor interrupted her toilet. As the grime was slowly removed, Severn observed that nature had intended her for a white cat. Her fur had disappeared in patches from disease or the chances of war. Her tail was bony and her spine sharp. But what charms she had were becoming apparent under vigorous licking, and he waited until she had finished before reopening the conversation. When at last she closed her eyes and folded her forepaws under her breast, he began again very gently. "Puss, tell me your troubles." At the sound of his voice she broke into a harsh rumbling, which he recognized as an attempt to purr. He bent over to rub her cheek, and she mewed again, an amiable, inquiring little mew, to which he replied, "Certainly you are greatly improved, and when you recover your plumage you will be a gorgeous bird." Much flattered, she stood up and marched around and around his legs, pushing her head between them and making pleased remarks, to which he responded with grave politeness. "Now what sent you here?" he said. "Here into the Street of the Four Winds, and up 5 flights to the very door where you would be welcome? What was it that prevented your meditated flight when I turned from my canvas to encounter your yellow eyes? Are you a Latin Quarter cat, as I am a Latin Quarter man? And why do you wear a rose-colored, flowered garter buckled about your neck?" The cat had climbed into his lap, and now sat purring as he passed hand over her thin coat. "Excuse me," he continued in lazy, soothing tones, harmonizing with her purring, "if I seem indelicate, but I cannot help musing on this rose-colored garter, flowered so quaintly and fastened with a silver clasp, for the clasp is silver. I can see the mint mark on the edge, as is prescribed by the law of the French Republic. Now why is this garter woven of rose silk and delicately embroidered? Why is this silken garter with its silver clasp about your famished throat? Am I indiscreet when I inquire if its owner is your owner? Is she some aged dame living in memory of youthful vanities, fond, doting on you, decorating you with her intimate personal attire? The circumference of the garter would suggest this, for your neck is thin, and the garter fits you. But then again I notice most things, that the garter is capable of being much enlarged. These small silver-rimmed eyelets, of which I count 5, are proof of that. And now I observe that the 5th eyelet is worn out, as though the tongue of the clasp were accustomed to lie there. This seems to argue a well-rounded form." The cat curled her toes in contentment. The street was very still outside. He murmured on, Why should your mistress decorate you with an article most necessary to her at all times? Anyway, at most times. How did she come to slip this bit of silk and silver about your neck? Was it the caprice of a moment when you, before you had lost your pristine plumpness, marched singing into her bedroom to bid her good morning? Of course, and she sat up among the pillows, her hair coiled and tumbling to her shoulders, as you sprang upon the bed, purring, "Good day, my lady." Oh, it is very easy to understand. He yawned, resting his head on the back of the chair. The cat still purred, tightening and relaxing her padded claws over his knee. "Shall I tell you all about her, cat? She is very beautiful, your mistress," he murmured drowsily, "and her hair is heavy as burnished gold. I could paint her, not on canvas, for I should need shades and tones and hues and dyes more splendid than the iris of a splendid rainbow. I could only paint her with closed eyes, for in dreams alone can such colors as I need be found. For her eyes, I must have azure from skies untroubled by a cloud, the skies of dreamland. For her lips, roses from the palaces of slumberland, and for her brow, snowdrifts from the mountains which tower in fantastic pinnacles to the moons. Oh, much higher than our moon here, the crystal moons of dreamland. She is very beautiful, your mistress." The words died on his lips and his eyelids drooped. The cat, too, was asleep, her cheek turned up upon her wasted flank, her paws limp and relaxed. "It is fortunate," said Severn, sitting up and stretching, "that we have tied it over the dinner hour, for I have nothing to offer you for supper but what may be purchased with 1 silver franc. The cat on his knee rose, arched her back, yawned, and looked up at him. "What shall it be, a roast chicken with salad? No? Possibly you prefer beef? Of course, and I shall try an egg and some white bread. Now for the wines. Milk for you? Good. I shall take a little water fresh from the wood," with a motion toward the bucket in the sink. He put on his hat and left the room. The cat followed to the door, and after he had closed it behind him, she settled down, smelling at the cracks and cocking one ear at every creak from the crazy old building. The door below opened and shut. The cat looked serious, for a moment doubtful, and her ears flattened in a nervous expectation. Presently she rose with a jerk of her tail and started on a noiseless tour of the studio. She sneezed at a pot of turpentine, hastily retreating to the table, which she presently mounted, and having satisfied her curiosity concerning a roll of red modeling wax, returned to the door and sat down with her eyes on the crack over the threshold. Then she lifted her voice in a thin plaint. When Severn returned, he looked grave, but the cat, joyous and demonstrative, marched around him, rubbing her gaunt body against his legs, driving her head enthusiastically into his hand, and purring until her voice mounted to a squeal. He placed a bit of meat, wrapped in brown paper, upon the table, and with a penknife cut it into shreds. The milk he took from a bottle which had served for medicine, and poured it into the saucer on the hearth. The cat crouched before it, purring and lapping at the same time. He cooked his egg and ate it with a slice of bread, watching her busy with the shredded meat, and when he had finished and had filled and emptied a cup of water from the bucket in the sink, he sat down, taking her into his lap, where she at once curled up and began her toilet. He began to speak again, touching her caressingly at times by way of emphasis. "Cat, I have found out where your mistress lives. It's not very far away. It is here, under this same leaky roof, but in the north wing, which I had supposed was uninhabited. My janitor tells me this. By chance, he's almost sober this evening. The butcher on the Rue de Seine, where I bought your meat, knows you, and old Cabanet, the baker, identified you with needless sarcasm. They tell me hard tales of your mistress, which I shall not believe. They say she is idle and vain and pleasure-loving. They say she is harebrained and reckless. The little sculptor on the ground floor, who was buying rolls from old Cabanet, spoke to me tonight for the first time, although we have always bowed to each other. He said she was very good and very beautiful. He has only seen her once and does not know her name. I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him so warmly. Cabanet said, 'Into this cursed street of the four winds blow all things evil.' The sculptor looked confused, But when he went out with his rolls, he said to me, I'm sure, monsieur, that she is as good as she is beautiful. The cat had finished her toilet, and now, springing softly to the floor, went to the door and sniffled. He knelt beside her, and unclasping the garter, held it in his moment hand. After a while, he said, There is a name engraved upon the silver clasp beneath the buckle. It's a pretty name, Sylvia Elvin. Sylvia is a woman's name. Elvin is the name of a town. In Paris, in this quarter, above all, in this street of the Four Winds, names are worn and put away as the fashions change with the seasons. I know the little town of Elvin, for there I met fate face to face, and fate was unkind. But do you know that in Elvin, fate had another name, and that name was Sylvia? He replaced the garter and stood up, looking down at the cat crouched before the closed door. The name of Elvin has a charm for me. It tells me of meadows and clear rivers. The name of Sylvia troubles me like the perfume from dead flowers. The cat mewed. Yes, yes, he said soothingly, I will take you back. Your Sylvia is not my Sylvia. The world is wide, and Elvin is not unknown. Yet in the darkness and filth of poor Paris, in the sad shadows of this ancient house, these names are very pleasant to me. He lifted her in his arms and strode through the silent corridors to the stairs, down 5 flights and into the moonlit court, past the little sculptor's den, and then again in at the gate of the north wing, and up the worm-eaten stairs he passed, until he came to a closed door. When he had stood knocking for a long time, something moved behind the door. It opened and he went in. The room was dark. As he crossed the threshold, the cat sprang from his arms into the shadows. He listened, but heard nothing. The silence was oppressive, and he struck a match. At his elbow stood a table, and on the table a candle in a gilded candlestick. This he lighted and looked around. The chamber was vast, the hangings heavy with embroidery. Over the fireplace towered a carved mantel, gray with the ashes of dead fires. In a recess by the deep-set windows stood a bed, from which the bedclothes, soft and fine as lace, trailed to the polished floor. He lifted the candle above his head. A handkerchief lay at his feet. It was faintly perfumed. He turned toward the windows. In front of them was a canapé, and over it flung, pell-mell, a gown of silk, a heap of lace-like garments, white and delicate as Spider's message, long, crumpled gloves, and on the floor beneath, the stockings, the little pointed shoes, and one garter of rosy silk, quaintly flowered and fitted with a silver clasp. Wondering, he stepped forward and drew the heavy curtains from the bed. For a moment the candle flared in his hand. Then his eyes met 2 other eyes, wide open, smiling, and the candle flame flashed over hair heavy as gold. She was pale, but not as white as he. Her eyes were untroubled as a child. But he stared, trembling from head to foot, while the candle flickered in his hand. At last he whispered, Sylvia, it is I. Again he said, It is I. Then, knowing that she was dead, he kissed her on the mouth. And through the long watches of the night, the cat purred on his knee, tightening and relaxing her padded claws until the sky paled above the street of the Four Winds. So that is our tale of lost love and kind of the spookiness, like why did the cat know to come find Severn? They hadn't met. His Sylvia had obviously been living there in that same freaking building for all this time, presumably as somewhat of a recluse, but, hanging out there the whole time, and his lost love was right freaking there. But that connection was there. Maybe she had stalked him a little bit. Maybe she had been telling the cat where he lived, and that was why he went there. Maybe it was her ghost. We don't really know. But he was connected at the very end. Unfortunately, she was dead. Now, one of the things when I was reading through this story that kind of concerned me, I don't know if she just wasn't taking care of the cat very well through the last stages of her life, and the cat, got out at the end, but either because, I mean, the cat was pretty gaunt, not well fed, pretty beat up, seemed like it had been wandering the streets for a while. So was Sylvia dead for a while and nobody noticed, and he went in there and just kissed a corpse that had possibly been rotting for a while? Or had she just died and hadn't been taking care of the cat? I'm not really sure, but that's where my head goes with these things, and I don't know where to go with that. So when reading through the stories as well, I mean, this was definitely one with that. I'm looking forward to reading a lot more of Chambers' work and getting through some more of the stuff. So there will be more of this, and there is a good amount of short stories that we can tap into there that dip more into even the sci-fi aspect and some more of the supernatural. So, but this was a good kind of segue into his work, and I enjoyed it. And again, I mean, it's got cats, so hey, there's that for me. So with that, do you want to make sure if you are listening in on the podcast, regardless of where you're listening in, do please check that subscribe button so that you get notifications. If you're on Podbean, or if you are familiar with Podbean, go over there and podcast.rocksoulradio.com. Click the subscribe button there. That really lets me know the best as far as who's listening in, who's subscribing, and all of that stuff. Show some love. Really been very, very thankful for all of the people that have been listening in across the globe. Really got a bunch of people in Canada, Great Britain, France, Ireland, even people in Japan and Australia listening in. So thank you all very much for that. I absolutely love it that you are enjoying the stories, and that hopefully you're enjoying the little bit of information that comes along with them. If you are listening in live, love that. Make sure you check out the Rock Soul Radio Facebook page. We are coming to you. The stories are broadcast live on Rock Soul Radio. It's ROCKDSOUL radio.com. Check out the website there. Check out the Facebook page. Give us a like over there. There's lots more stuff going on throughout the radio station. It's a 24/7 mix of Chicago's best independent music. And every Wednesday, one of these weird little stories too. Now, coming up next week, we have another new artist for us. It is Guy de Maupassant, and I'm probably butchering his name, but we're doing the Diary of a Madman next week. And the week after that, we actually have a very unique, we're changing things up a little bit with a brand new story. This is a story that was written by an up-and-coming author, and I'm excited about it, and there's no royalties associated with it, so we're doing it. Hopefully it's going to be read by the author. Otherwise, it will be read by me, your wonderful host, and we'll go from there. Every Monday, check out New Music Monday on Rock Soul Radio 2. While we dip into the old stuff here on Wednesdays, Monday is all about brand new music coming out of the Chicago world, and we've got great stuff coming up from Mr. Constant next week, Monday the 12th. All right? So that is all I have for you guys this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. Again, like, share, follow on all of the wonderful social media. Facebook, I'm on the Twitter, I'm at Instagram, and of course you can find me right here on Podbean with Wednesday's Weird Stories every week. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Wednesday's Weird Stories. Join me each week for a new tale from your favorite Gothic authors, and catch up on missed episodes in the archive at podcast.rocksoulradio.com.